"You're just a farmer." My dad didn't even whisper it. He said it loud enough for every guest at my brother's wedding to hear. The room erupted in laughter while my brother raised his glass with a smirk. I smiled, congratulated the newlyweds, and quietly left. They thought they'd embarrass me for the last time. 7 days later, my father walked into his company's biggest board meeting, confident, respected, untouchable. Then the CEO stood up, looked directly at me, smiled, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to finally meet the owner whose farmland saved this company." The room went completely silent. My name is Emma Carter, and I'm 36 years old. If you'd asked anyone in my hometown what I did for a living, they would have shrugged and said, "She's just a farmer." They never saw the contracts I negotiated before sunrise. They never saw the satellite maps, the irrigation systems, or the spreadsheets that kept thousands of acres producing food year after year. To them, dirt on my boots mattered more than the numbers in my bank account, especially to my father. The farm had belonged to my grandfather. When he passed away 12 years earlier, everyone assumed I'd sell it. My younger brother, Daniel, certainly expected me to. Instead, I invested every dollar I had into modern equipment, hired experienced agronomists, and slowly transformed the struggling property into one of the most productive farms in the state. I never chased interviews or magazine covers. I preferred watching crops grow over watching my name appear in headlines. Dad never understood that. He spent 35 years climbing the corporate ladder at Harrison Foods, one of the region's largest food manufacturers. To him, success came with polished shoes, glass offices, and business cards. Farming, no matter how profitable, was something people escaped, not something they chose. Whenever relatives gathered, he'd introduce Daniel proudly. "This is my son, senior executive, bright future." Then he'd gesture toward me. "And this is Emma. She stayed on the farm." Those words always carried the same quiet disappointment. Daniel wasn't cruel by nature, but he had learned from the best. He enjoyed reminding people that he worked in climate-controlled offices while I worked under the sun. I usually smiled and changed the subject. Arguing never changed anyone's opinion. The day of Daniel's wedding was beautiful. The ceremony overlooked a vineyard outside Chicago, with white flowers lining the aisle and a string quartet playing softly in the background. Everything looked perfect, exactly the kind of wedding my father had always dreamed of hosting. I genuinely wanted my brother to be happy. I bought the couple an expensive antique dining table handcrafted from reclaimed walnut, something I knew would last longer than any trendy gift on their registry. I left it anonymously because I didn't want attention. During the reception, guests laughed, toasted the newlyweds, and shared stories from childhood. Then my father stood to give his speech. At first, it was everything you'd expect. He praised Daniel's career, welcomed his new daughter-in-law into the family, and joked about getting older. Then his eyes landed on me. "You know," he said with a grin, "Daniel always aimed high." A few guests chuckled. Dad raised his glass. Unlike someone else in this family who decided growing corn was a career plan. Laughter spread across the room. He wasn't finished. Looking directly at me, he smirked. "Maybe someday you'll afford a wedding like this too, if vegetables start paying CEO salaries." The laughter grew louder. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. For a second, the room became impossibly quiet inside my own head. I simply smiled. "I hope you two have a wonderful life together," I said, raising my glass toward Daniel and his bride. Then I picked up my purse and walked out without another word. 3 days later, while checking irrigation reports before sunrise, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Carter?" a calm voice asked. "Yes. My name is Michael Reeves, CEO of Harrison Foods. I'd like to invite you to a confidential board meeting this Friday regarding a strategic land partnership." I frowned. "Harrison Foods?" "Yes." My stomach tightened as I glanced at the email he sent while we were speaking. At the bottom of the invitation was the company logo, the same logo hanging outside the headquarters where my father had worked his entire career. Friday arrived faster than I expected. I parked outside Harrison Foods headquarters 15 minutes early. The glass tower reflected the morning sun, looking every bit as impressive as I remembered from the few company events I'd attended years before. My father had always spoken about this building with pride, calling it the place where real business happened. I straightened my navy blazer, took a slow breath, and walked inside. The receptionist smiled the moment I gave her my name. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Mr. Reeves is expecting you." She handed me a visitor badge without asking for identification. A young executive approached almost immediately. "Right this way." He led me toward a private elevator that required a security card. As the doors closed, he said, "The board members have already arrived." That sentence alone told me this wasn't an ordinary meeting. When the elevator opened onto the executive floor, polished wood walls and floor-to-ceiling windows stretched in every direction. Assistants hurried between offices carrying folders and laptops. Then I saw him. My father stood outside the boardroom talking with several senior executives. He was wearing one of his tailored charcoal suits, confidently reviewing documents as though he belonged at the center of every important decision. His eyes lifted. The moment he recognized me, his smile disappeared. He excused himself from the group and walked over quickly. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "I have a meeting." He frowned. "No, you don't." "I do." His expression hardened. "Emma, this floor is restricted. These meetings involve executives." "I know." He glanced toward the conference room before lowering his voice. "If you're here because of what happened at the wedding, don't do this. You'll only embarrass yourself." I met his eyes calmly. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. Then leave before security has to ask you." Before I could answer, the same young executive returned. "Miss Carter, the board is ready for you." My father looked confused. "For her?" "Yes, sir." The executive opened the boardroom doors. Inside sat nearly 20 people around a long walnut table. Directors, legal counsel, financial officers, and department heads quietly reviewed thick presentation binders. At the far end stood Michael Reeves. The CEO smiled the moment he saw me. "There you are." He walked across the room before anyone else had time to react. Instead of greeting the directors first, he came directly to me. He extended both hands. "Miss Carter, thank you for making the trip. It's good to meet you in person." "The pleasure is mine." Every conversation inside the room stopped. My father remained frozen near the doorway. Michael turned toward everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin today's agenda, I'd like to introduce someone many of you have heard about but haven't had the opportunity to meet." He looked at me. "This is Emma Carter, owner and president of Carter Farms." Several board members nodded respectfully. Michael continued. "For the past 18 months, we've evaluated expansion opportunities across 3 states. Every proposal eventually led us back to one conclusion." He paused. "Carter Farms owns the only continuous agricultural property capable of supporting our next-generation processing facility while meeting our long-term sustainability goals." The room remained silent. Our entire expansion depends on reaching an agreement with Miss Carter. I noticed several directors turning toward me with genuine interest. One whispered, "So she's the landowner." Another quietly closed his notebook and sat up straighter. Michael smiled. "Actually, she's much more than that." He gestured toward the empty chair beside the board chairman. "Miss Carter, would you please take your seat?" I glanced briefly toward my father. For the first time in my life, he looked completely speechless. I took the seat beside the chairman exactly as Michael Reeves had asked. Across the table, my father slowly lowered himself into his own chair without saying a word. For the first time I could remember, he wasn't the most confident person in the room. Michael opened the meeting. "Before discussing numbers, I'd like everyone to understand why Ms. Carter's operation is unique." The screen behind him lit up with satellite images of my farmland. Thousands of acres stretched across the display. "Our consultants evaluated more than 40 potential locations," Michael explained. "Only one met every requirement: soil quality, water access, transportation routes, environmental standards, and long-term production capacity." He looked toward me. "Ms. Carter built this operation herself." Several board members nodded with genuine admiration. One director asked, "How long did it take to reach this scale?" "About 12 years," I answered. It started with one difficult season and a lot of mistakes. Every improvement came one harvest at a time. For the next hour, we discussed logistics, infrastructure, and supply projections. There were no dramatic speeches, just business. Whenever a question came up about the land, everyone looked toward me. I answered carefully, explaining crop rotation plans, conservation practices, transportation costs, and future expansion options. The executives listened, not because of my title, because I knew exactly what I was talking about. Every few minutes, I noticed my father watching quietly from across the table. He never interrupted. He never corrected me. When the financial terms were presented, Michael slid the agreement toward me. We'd be honored to partner with Carter Farms. I reviewed every page before speaking. I have one condition. The room grew still. I want every local family farm supplying this facility to receive long-term contracts with fair pricing. I won't build something that only benefits one business while smaller farms disappear. Several directors exchanged surprised looks. Michael smiled. I was hoping you'd ask for something like that. He reached across the table and shook my hand. Done. The agreement was signed. Applause filled the room. Not loud or theatrical. Just genuine respect. As people gathered their folders, several executives introduced themselves and thanked me personally for my professionalism. One even laughed. I expected to meet a corporate negotiator. I smiled. You did. An hour later, I stepped into the parking garage carrying my briefcase. Emma. I turned. My father stood a few feet away. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked down at the concrete floor. I was wrong. Those 3 words sounded heavier than any speech he could have given. I judged your work because I didn't understand it. I nodded but stayed silent. He looked back at me. When I called you just a farmer, I thought success only existed inside buildings like that. He pointed toward the headquarters behind us. But today I realized something. I waited. You built something people depend on. His voice cracked slightly. And I never gave you credit for it. I smiled gently. Dad, I never wanted you to admire me because I became successful. He frowned. I wanted you to respect me when I was still just your daughter. He closed his eyes for a moment before quietly saying, I'm sorry. A week later, he drove out to the farm alone. There were no expensive gifts, no dramatic apologies. He simply picked up a pair of work gloves and spent the afternoon helping me repair an old wooden fence my grandfather had built decades earlier. We talked more that afternoon than we had in years. Some things couldn't be erased, but they could begin to heal. People still call me a farmer. Now, whenever I hear those words, I simply smile, because the same soil my family once looked down on became the foundation of a future they never imagined. And I finally learned that real success isn't proving people wrong. It's staying true to yourself until the truth speaks louder than their opinions.